All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate everyone who's here in person in the overflow room, who is online for our 5th annual Hal and Carol Kohn Distinguished Alumni Lecture. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dean Angela Kashuba, and I am so pleased to be here and so pleased to introduce you to our speaker today. I want to first acknowledge, though, Hal and Carol Kohn, who are sitting up near the front of the room, for their generosity in providing this gift to us to allow us to bring in distinguished alumni from our PharmD program, from our PhD program, to share their knowledge and wisdom and experience with us. This is a really wonderful annual event for us, and it really brings us a lot of prestige to be able to bring back some of our really successful alums. I do want to let you know that Hal is a professor emeritus at the school. He was recruited in 1999 to reinvent the division that we now call chemical biology and medicinal chemistry. So he was chair of that division for many years. He served also as the first director of the Campbell Faculty Mentoring Program, which is a flagship junior faculty mentoring program for our school, and is an exemplar for faculty mentoring programs across campus and nationally. In 2018, Hal was the recipient of the school's Distinguished Service Award in recognition of his exceptional accomplishments and contributions to the school and to the profession. And so again, thank you very much, Hal and Carol, for your generous donation that makes this possible. I am now very pleased to introduce you to this year's Kohn Distinguished Alumni Lecturer, and that is Vaughn Bryson. So Vaughn is a Gastonia native, and he earned his BS in pharmacy from us in 1960, along with his wife, Nancy, who joins him today. One of our past deans, Bill Campbell, said that Nancy was the penultimate pharmacy student. She graduated also from our program in 1960, and she was always the smartest person in the room. So we are very excited to have both Vaughn here and Nancy here, along with their daughter, Kathy. So it's really a pleasure to see everyone here. Vaughn has the distinction of serving on the first UNC baseball team to play in the College World Series. So he is an athlete, along with a pharmacist and a leader. Following graduation, he joined Eli Lilly, and in 1967, he earned an MBA from Stanford University. He was at Lilly for 32 years, and he worked his way to the role of CEO from sales at the helm of the pharmaceutical giant that now has the biggest market cap globally. It's an amazing story for that company, and I'm excited to hear Vaughn's story as well. He has led a very distinguished career as an executive, an advisor, a board member, and a volunteer. And he's also generously contributed his time and expertise to better the university, serving in many leadership roles over the years. In 2004, the university's General Alumni Association awarded Vaughn and Nancy the Distinguished Service Medal. And in granting this award, the GAA citation noted that hardly a corner of Carolina has not been touched by this extraordinary pair. So it is a privilege to have this family here with us today, and to hear from Vaughn today as an exceptional leader who has made significant contributions to the field of pharmacy and pharmaceutical sciences. So please join me in welcoming Vaughn.
Well, thank you very much. This is called a lecture, but I've never given a lecture in my life. And you're going to be relieved I'm not showing slides. So there's no audio visuals here. Special thanks to Hal and Carol for doing this. They may regret it when it's over, but we'll see. So as Angela mentioned, I grew up in Gastonia. For those of you not from North Carolina, Gastonia is about 20 miles west of Charlotte. And when I was growing up, it was a bustling textile town. Obviously, most of that business has gone to Asia, so Gastonia has changed a lot. I mean, I grew up on the industrial side, the poor side of Gastonia. So I went to one school for grades 1 through 8, and almost everybody in that school had an objective of graduating from high school and working in a cotton mill. And somehow my parents, my father was born in 1901. I'm so grateful. There was no child labor law then, and his father died when he was 10. So he went to work in a mill in Georgia. So he had a third grade education. My mother grew up on a farm. And when she graduated from high school, they eventually got married. And I never heard from them if you go to college. It was when you go to college. So for two people who didn't have an educational background, they had somehow had the appreciation of the importance of education. So I was a big sports fan of Carolina, and my parents had a family friend. There was no real guidance counseling in Gastonia High School then. Had a family friend who was a pharmacist, and he brought me to Chapel Hill for a football game. And I was so excited to come here. And he took me by the pharmacy school, which was in Howell Hall. And unexpectedly, they gave me a test. And they said, after when we finished walking around, they said, if you decide to come to pharmacy school here, we will give you a tuition scholarship. So it wasn't, in contrast to probably all of you, there wasn't a real conscious decision on my part that I want to be a pharmacist and et cetera, et cetera. So I came to UNC. Pharmacy school then, you're going to find this inconceivable, was 4 years. And we took some pharmacy classes first semester. You were in general college, but you were taking pharmacy classes. And I then went out for the baseball team in the spring. And fortunately, I was the only person, fortunately for me, the only person that made the baseball freshman varsity. You couldn't participate in varsity athletics then. I was the only person who made the baseball team who hadn't been out in the fall. And so I thought, okay, nobody had gone to pharmacy school and played intercollegiate athletics at UNC in over 20 years. I thought, okay, this has been an interesting experience. I've enjoyed it. I love being on the team. And then my sophomore year, I had a roommate who was on the baseball team. And he came back and he said, Coach Rabb said, you're going to be the starting first baseman. And he didn't know that I didn't even plan to go out. I didn't think it was going to be possible. So I went to see Dean Brecht, and I said, I have an opportunity to play baseball. Is there any way we can modify the curriculum so I can do that? So he was really helpful, and we moved some courses around. And it so happened, quite fortuitously, that one of the courses I moved from the spring of my junior year to the fall of my senior year. So I was surrounded by all juniors except for Nancy Faison. So that's how I really got to know Nancy. And then we had our first date after, it was actually a short date after a basketball game in really the beginning of our senior year, or the spring of our senior year. So we had our first date, and ironically, we then, the senior class visited pharmaceutical companies. So the next day, we got on a train to go to Kalamazoo, Michigan to visit Upjohn, and then down to Indianapolis to visit Lilly. So on that train trip, I got to know, Nancy Bryson, and she's been the guidepost in our family ever since. Then you had to, pharmacy school was 4 years, but you had to have a years of experience as an apprentice before you could take the state board exam. So some of that you could do during college, some of that you had to wait until after you graduated. So I had accepted a job in a drugstore in Gastonia, was living at Homes. It turned out Gastonia was a real baseball hotbed when I was growing up. And the NCAA regionals were there. We played there. And we won to go to the College World Series, as Angela mentioned. When the regionals were over, the owner of the local professional team said, would you like to play here? And I said, well, I've accepted this job. If I can work it out with the drugstore, then I would love to play here this summer. Well, it turns out, Gastonia was in the middle of the league and we had no nights out. And the drugstore agreed to let me play. The significance of that is when I was named the CEO of Lilly, they said in the press release, the first pharmacist to be the CEO of Lilly since Eli Lilly, who was the grandson of the founder. So they don't know that if a drugstore hadn't let me play, I would have quit the same day that I got the notice that I passed the state board exam. But by virtue of them letting me play, I was a pharmacist for 2 weeks. So anyway, I was impressed with Lilly from what I'd heard about the professors, and I love what I think are the core values of Eli Lilly and Company set up by the family. There aren't many family businesses that last through 3 generations, but that happened at Lilly. The first non-Lilly CEO was in the late 50s. I've known every CEO of Lilly that wasn't a member of the family. But their core values were operate with integrity, a quest for excellence, and respect for the individual. And I think that's still the cornerstone of the way this company operates today. So in 1961, I was hired as a sales rep. At that point, Lilly only hired pharmacists and sales reps. And that was true with Upjohn, which no longer exists. Also true with Hart-Davis, which no longer exists. And all 3 of those companies offered me a job. And it turned out Nancy was working as a hospital pharmacist in Charlotte. And the Lilly job they offered me was in Winston-Salem. So whereas Upjohn's job was in Baltimore and Hart-Davis was somewhere else. So I went to work for Lilly in 1961. In 1960, this is kind of inconceivable today, their revenues were $178 million. This year, they will do in excess of $46 billion. They spent less than $20 million in R&D, and this year it'll be probably 12, 13, 14 billion. And they had 10,000 employees then. They have 43,000 today. So I was really lucky because I went to work for a pharmaceutical company and just really the early stages of major drug discovery. And I went to work for a good company, and this is truly all luck, and in a great growing industry. Lilly's revenue in 1960, as you probably know, they were the first company to commercialize insulin in the 1920s. So that was an important product. But the biggest product in 1960 was polio vaccine. They had been one of the first companies to develop Salk polio vaccine. So anyway, I went to work as a salesman, started in Winston-Salem, then went to Jacksonville, and finally had a hospital assignment in Atlanta at Emory Medical School. And they started in 1965 something called a field sales exchange program. And I was the guinea pig. I was picked as one person out of 1,000-man sales force. Nancy was working as a hospital pharmacist in Atlanta, so she took a 3-month sabbatical, and we go to Indianapolis. And so my assignment was market research. And I was surrounded by all these MBAs with all these analytical skills, but they didn't have the feel and the knowledge of the market that I had. But I had an appreciation that they've got some skills that certainly are much better than mine if I'm going to succeed in the business world. And for some reason, you're going to talk about luck. When my 3 months were over, they offered me a job in market research. And I worked for a really smart guy. He was a Wharton MBA. He later became the general manager of Lilly in Italy, and then left the company, went back to Harvard and got a doctorate and stayed on the business school faculty at Harvard. And the division director was a guy by the name of Dick Wood, who was my predecessor as the CEO of Lilly. So it was really smart people that I was working for. But I was also offered a job in human resources. We called it personnel then. And for some reason, I took the HR job after 3 months in market research. And it gave me a much broader perspective on the company and the values of the company. And so I worked there for, probably a year. And then I asked for an educational leave, and I decided that I was going to go back to business school. I only applied to Harvard. And my job in HR had done a lot of college recruiting for MBAs and people in finance and marketing and legal. And so I had an appreciation for, what certain business schools had to offer. So I was enrolled at Harvard. And then the company came back and said, we will send you to a couple of other programs. And I said, no, I don't have interested in that. And then they came back and said, if you apply to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and he was the founder of General Motors. And if you get a fellowship from the Sloan Foundation, we will sponsor you in the Sloan program at either Stanford or MIT. And I wound up, I was going to have to wait a year to go to MIT. And secondly, Stanford had a component of liberal arts that MIT did not. And as I said kind of earlier today, in pharmacy school then you had 2 electives. And to play baseball, I took one of them by correspondence. That'd be your equivalent of online. And in my last semester of my senior year at Carolina, I took the other half of this course, and I found it so enlightening and felt like, wow, I've missed a lot in terms of my undergraduate education. And so the liberal arts component that Stanford included in their program was really appealing to me. So I go to Stanford, and then I come back, and I learned a lot. I was by far the youngest person in the program. The criteria for the Sloan program at either MIT or Stanford was middle manager with top management potential. Well, hell, I was 28 years old. I wasn't even a middle manager. So I learned a lot from my peers as well as the faculty. And I come back and started again at a management level in HR. And it was a reversal of my initial employment, then go to market research. And then they finally sent me to California as a district sales manager. And I came back from that and worked in distribution, which was something totally foreign to me. But at that point, we used to ship all of our products in the United States out of Indianapolis. So we looked at regional distribution. Then I was made a director of sales, which was a pretty important high-level position in a company that was largely US dominated. And about that time, Lilly, which had been an over-the-counter company listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I came back from that job as director of market research. And then in 1974, I became the executive director of new product planning, which was an important job, and also international marketing, which gave me some exposure to international. In 1975 and through 1979, I had the responsibility for Japan and Asia. And then they later added a criteria called Commonwealth countries, so a definition. So I had Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada. And it was a real tribute to my family that they put up with that, because I was gone 150 days a year. I went to Japan 29 times in that 4 years, but it was a really important market for us. We had a relationship with a Japanese company called Shionogi that went back to 1909. And if you weren't in Japan prior to World War II, you were not able to have a wholly owned affiliate. So we had this relationship with Shionogi, and for like 23 out of 25 years, we had the #1 product in the Japanese market, which is the second largest market in the world. But in 1975, they enabled companies to set up their own operation. So even though we continued our relationship with Shionogi, we were the first company to set up a wholly owned affiliate that hadn't been there before. Today, Japan is the second largest company revenue-wise for Lilly. And we also opened an office during my time in China. And that office, the housing for expats then, there was very little. The couple that took the job, they had a hot plate in one hotel room, and their adjoining hotel room was where they slept. And now China is Lilly's third largest affiliate. So both of those ventures have become really important to the company. The other experience I had in running that part of the world was you had all three lines of business. So Lilly had pharmaceutical business, obviously the biggest. They had a pretty significant agricultural business, both agricultural, chemical, and animal health. A lot of pharmaceutical companies had animal health divisions that really came from outgrowth of their human pharmaceutical research that had an animal application. And then they also, the big pharmaceutical companies, it's amazing the herd effect, because in the late 70s, or late 60s, early 70s, they all bought cosmetic companies. And the cosmetic companies had higher PE multiples, so there was no dilution. And there was also a feeling that one of these days, the Food and Drug Administration was gonna regulate cosmetic products called cosmeceuticals. And so we bought Elizabeth Arden and had 35 people working in research in Indianapolis. And so I learned a little bit about Elizabeth Arden when I had Asia. And then in like typical companies, they centralized, decentralized. In 1979, Lilly decided to reestablish a European headquarters. So when I accepted the job, before it was ever publicized, they said the job will either be in Brussels, Paris, or London. And fortunately, it was in London. And I didn't have to learn, at least completely, a new language. So it was a fabulous experience of learning about doing business in Europe. Obviously, collectively, it's the second largest market in the world. A lot of the major pharmaceutical companies are US or European based. In 1982, I got parachuted into running the agricultural business. So I left the pharmaceutical business completely. People didn't realize it at the time, but Lilly's biggest product was a pre-emergent herbicide for soybeans and cotton. And we were going to go off patent in the mid-80s. And our big competitors in the ag chem business were large chemical companies. And we bought an awful lot of our intermediates and did the final manufacturing at Lilly. So I learned something about the ag business. Our animal health business was also really big. And I learned something about the culture of a different part of the company, very much ag related. I found, and this was an interesting leadership lesson for me, the guys in that business were more interested in telling me what they thought I wanted to hear rather than answering my questions directly. So it was a cultural change for them and for me to go through that experience. In 1984, I joined the Lilly board, and also they added the medical device division, which was a fabulous experience. We had 12 companies, mostly focused on cardiovascular. It was the fastest growing component of the Lilly. These were all smart, entrepreneurial companies working in an industry where product life cycles were a lot shorter than they are in the pharmaceutical side. And I set up a rule that if anybody from Indianapolis wanted to visit one of these companies, they had to get my approval. Because Lilly was a conservative pharmaceutical company in the Midwest with long product life cycles. I didn't want us to try to Lillyize all these companies that had this entrepreneurial spirit that made us want to buy them in the first place. And so it was an interesting learning experience. We learned a lot from those companies. Like we had the leading angioplasty company, and so their product life cycles were so short, they became really good at the handoff between research and manufacturing and then on to marketing. One of the companies specialized in total quality control. Another one, from a manufacturing point of view, they use learning curves to really help them improve their manufacturing capabilities. So it was, for me, a real management development experience. And I was really excited about some of the things happening in those companies. For example, I have one show and tell thing. So we had a company in Minneapolis that was in the pacemaker business. And we were relatively small compared to Medtronic, but we licensed the technology for an implantable defibrillator. So this is the first implantable defibrillator. Weighs 200 grams. They would have to install it in your abdomen. They would crack your chest and put the leads on the surface of the heart. Today, an implantable defibrillator that also has pacemaking capability is smaller than your watch. So it was, I mean, and actually Michelle Morawski, who came up with the idea of the defibrillator, implantable defibrillator, really deserves the Nobel Prize, because there have been millions of people around the world whose lives have been saved by this concept of an implantable defibrillator. In 1986, when I was given the responsibility for Elizabeth Arden, and I don't know why Lilly bought Elizabeth Arden. At that point, the cosmetic company was Arden. In Arden's case, skincare was their primary calling card. And so there was a lot of ointments and liquids and so on involved. And I like to say to the women in the audience, you make lipstick the same way you make a suppository. So anyway, we studied that business for a year, and I said, and actually half of their revenues came from the fragrance side, which is all promotion, and essentially all of their profits. So I thought, this makes no sense for us to be in this business. And I went to the board and said, we should divest it. And again, typical arrogance of a lot of companies. Lilly had made 20 acquisitions and had never had a divestiture. So it was really an interesting, challenging experience to go through. And then in 1989, we did a joint venture with Dow in the ag chem business, because it was really clear, our first product was our Grand Slam home run, and after that, we never had a major product. So we did a joint venture with Dow. We insisted that it be based in Indianapolis. And there were a lot of people in Midland, Michigan who were happy to move to Indianapolis. And we also had a put provision. So at some point, after I left, Lilly exercised the put, which made sense, and they got out of the ag business completely. And by now, they have spun off the animal health business. So anyway, in 1991, I was made the president and CEO. And at that time, Lilly had the longest stretch of quarterly earnings increases on the New York Stock Exchange. So my first quarter there was an accounting standards board ruling about how companies expensed healthcare retirement expenses. So it was going to be a $300 million loss. So my first experience, or my first quarter as a CEO, we took a real bath. And the board said, okay, if we know we're going to have a significant decrease in earnings, why don't we look at other assets that maybe are less valuable today? So we took a big bath. I think the total cost was close to $900 million. So it was not a great start for me. You know, I was told I was going to be the CEO. I had some time to think about it, and I decided I had three objectives. One was to provide some clear focus and direction for the company. And healthcare was changing a lot. This was about the time that Hillary Clinton had her proposed healthcare plan. And I went, you know, as an aside, I went to Washington one time and met with the guy who, under Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton was the president at the time, a guy by the name of Our Magazine, and I was so struck by the arrogance that, you know, they thought overnight they were going to change 1/6 of the US economy. I mean, the complexity of healthcare and all the things they were proposing. And I was there with the CEO of IBM and the CEO of 3M, just the three of us. And I was just amazed at what they thought they were going to be able to accomplish. So anyway, I said, clear focus and direction. And we had a program called the 7 Essentials. Here are the 7 things we really need to do. The second was to create a more open climate. My predecessor was very much a top-down direction to the company. And then finally, my third objective, there was a very specific issue in the pharmaceutical division. So I was on the executive committee, and the head of pharmaceuticals and the head of manufacturing, and I had everything else. When there was disagreement about an issue, my predecessor didn't like dissonance. And so it wouldn't get resolved. It would drag on and on and on. And so I set up a pharmaceutical lead team with the number 2 guy in research and the number 2 guy in pharmaceuticals. And we were able to resolve a lot of those issues before they ever got to the executive committee level, which I thought would be really important. But in that preparatory process, before I became the CEO, I went to the Harvard Business School for one day, and we had 2 consultants there who had done a lot of work in management development programs with Lilly. And I said, okay, here are my objectives. Here are the things we're thinking about. You know, give me your advice, your reaction. And they said, well, you got to recognize this is going to be a big challenge. Because this is not, and they knew a lot about Lilly by virtue of being involved in these programs. They said, this is not going to be a transition. This is going to be transformational, and it's going to be challenging. And I will say they were absolutely right. I busted my butt for 18 months traveling around the world saying, here are the things we've got to change and to really succeed in this environment. And we wound up, we had a series of 4 meetings with the top 500 people in the company, 125 or so at each one. We did it at a convention center near Dulles, so easy for people around the world to get to. And it was a truly incredible experience because people, you know, leadership is really direction, alignment, and commitment. And that whole process, boy, people after that meeting bought into what needs to be done. And I went to every one. It was really tough for me because there was a lot of criticism of the company that I loved and worked for 30 years, 30-some years. But what really happened was the people in that conference, they bought in. It was not just Vaughn Bryson driving the boat. It was everybody had a role to play. So it was really fabulous experience. And we knew there was, as we looked at the environment, knew there was going to be growing government involvement in healthcare. There was going to be clearly a migration to greater price controls, restricted product access. Those were all the things that externally was happening. We also saw a fair amount of industry consolidation, so we were going to have bigger and stronger competitors. And there were also clearly increasing regulatory costs. So that meant R&D was going to go up and we were going to have shorter product life cycles. So of those 7 essentials, number 1 was speed to market. And we had a goal of developing a product for what we call team formation, so we think there's an active drug here, to registration in 2/3 of the market in the world. And we set a goal of 2,500 days. And we had there was a lot of work that went into, can we do that? I mean, this was a dramatic change, probably a 30% reduction in the amount of time it took to develop a drug. But it represented a real opportunity for us. And Angela asked today, as I look back, what do I think my greatest impact on Lilly was? And I think it was that initiative to really look at innovative ways to shorten our product development cycle. So today, Lilly's goal, and they described it a little bit differently. Lilly's goal is 2,250 days. That's still a long time, but that's a 40% reduction from where the way they measure it, from where they were. And the industry average is 3,300 days. So that's a tremendous competitive advantage. And you think about it, so really what happens when you do that, you obviously reduce the cost of developing a drug. You then free up resources to develop more products. You increase, when we had a couple of experiences, tobramycin compared to gentamicin, where we were second to market, and obviously the leader generally does much, much better. So we wanted to increase our probability of being first to market in a new therapeutic class. And finally, there's another benefit people don't really think much about, is generally for most products, your most profitable years are the last few years. Well, you were extending that end of year life cycle. So it increased the viability and the profitability of each of those molecules. So this, I will say, the whole 7 Essentials program unleashed an enormous amount of creativity, and we invited inputs from all 28,000 employees. So we then added, and I was asked earlier that we probably should have said, one of the other things that we did on my watch was we added a diversity initiative. And we had a task force basically charged with how do we take advantage of the diverse talent that exists in this organization. And finally, one little thing that we did had a much greater impact than I would have predicted. We gave a stock option to every employee in the company. So did it mean anything to the person in Indianapolis? Probably not. But for a janitor in Taiwan, was that important to him? Absolutely. But more importantly, it made every employee feel like stock options aren't just for the higher muckety mucks. It made every employee feel like an owner of the company. And it had a real transformational change in the way employees looked at their time at Lilly. So today, I'll quickly sum up. Today, as I look at the industry, I think there are 3 challenges. One, the challenge of replenishing your pipeline. Every company has that. As I said earlier, Lilly's got 20% of their revenue they're spending in research and development costs. That's not true in many industries. Wall Street thinks today, okay, Lilly is the dominant player along with Novo Nordisk in the whole GLP-1 space. They must think Lilly is stupid and not gonna take advantage of their leadership because they've got 11 GLP-1 products in the development pipeline. So they're not going to sleep. And then you also, the challenge, and it was a challenge when I was there, is to drive growth in key products, key markets. In 1990, Lilly was number 2 in the US. With all the acquisitions that the big companies have made, I don't think they're number 2, but they have the highest market cap and I think one of the best product portfolios in the industry. We were 122 in Japan in 1990. I'm sure today we're probably a top 10 company. So growth in key markets. Obviously, one of the challenges today is somehow increase the productivity and restructure the cost base. And I think artificial intelligence, which I can't tell you how, but I think it's very clear it's going to have an impact on the way companies operate. And finally, I think you have to continue to work on the culture and the climate of the company. For those of you who know a little bit about baseball, there was an old black pitcher by the name of Satchel Paige, and I saw a quote attributed to Satchel one time. I don't know whether it was really something he attributed, so I had this made up for a plaque I put on my desk, and I took away Satchel and I put S. Page. And he said, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And I think you've got to make sure you create a climate where people feel like they can contribute. Their ideas are, some may be good, some may be bad, but their ideas are certainly, you're receptive to them. And the final thing I would say, in my new employee speech that I would give whenever we'd get new employees come in, I would say, gosh, and was I wrong? I would say the next 25 years are going to be unbelievable. I think our understanding of the biochemical and genetic nature of disease is going to lead to a lot of solutions to healthcare problems. And I think a lot of them are going to be pharmaceutical related, not all. Some are going to be gene therapy treatments. And also, then I said, there are going to be a number of emerging economies after food, shelter, and clothing. Healthcare is going to be pretty high on the priority list. And so then my perspective was Eastern Europe, China. Today, I would say China's made some real progress. India today, sub-Saharan Africa. I still think the same ideas really apply. They're going to be really parts of the world that are going to need pharmaceutical solutions to the healthcare issues. So I would say, for those of you, all of you have a pharmacy background. There are lots of opportunities in the industry, some of it on the business side, some of it on the research side, some of it on the regulatory side. But I still think the outlook and promise for the industry for the next 25 years are going to be dramatic. And so with your education, you're far better qualified than I was to take advantage of these opportunities. So, and the other thing I would say about working in the pharmaceutical industry, and it's probably true working as a pharmacist, so my 2 weeks experience, I can't tell you much, but there's a lot of psychic income in working in this industry. I mean, when as a CEO, you'd get letters from people saying, wow, this antibiotic saved my kid's life, or this, and Lilly was the company that had Prozac. I mean, the ability to treat depression. And as I look back at it, was Prozac that much better than some of the other antidepressants? Maybe not, but it had fewer side effects. So it was more tolerable for patients and therefore was really successful. So I will conclude my remarks. I've talked longer than you probably wanted. So.
No, this is terrific. Please join me in thanking Vaughn for. I have written down a whole host of lessons learned that I need to keep in mind from your talk, Vaughn. This is really terrific. I want to open it up to Q&A. So those of you who are online, please put a question in the chat. We're going to monitor that. For those of you who are in the room, please push and hold your mic button to ask a question. But I want to ask one first that I think probably everybody is interested in hearing about. You talked about being first to market in a new therapeutic class. And so the GLP-1s were pretty incredible blockbuster drugs currently for diabetes, obesity. We're thinking about them for all kinds of other things right now. Can you walk us through, some say, well, that's an overnight success. Okay. Can you walk us through what an overnight success really looks like?
Well, I would say GLP-1s, people have known about the therapeutic benefits of the GLP-1 hormone since the probably late 80s, early 90s. But the problem was it had a very short duration of action, less than an hour. So there was no way people would benefit. And there was an endocrinologist at the Bronx VA hospital who began to think about, this is great insight in the innovative thought process. This guy got to thinking, now, why is it that a Gila monster, and John Ing's his name, he's never seen a Gila monster. But he said, why is it that a Gila monster can eat once every 6 months? They don't have hypoglycemia beforehand, and they don't have hyperglycemia immediately after eating. And he was able to isolate a peptide from the saliva of the Gila monster that was very similar to the GLP-1 structure. So he had a GLP-1 agonist. And the big pharmaceuticals, none of pharmaceutical companies weren't interested. They poo-pooed the idea. So if you go to a major conference like the American Diabetes Association, if your research not good enough to make the program, they have poster sessions. So John Ing had a poster session. And I was on the board of a biotech company in San Diego by the name of Amylin, and the CEO was probably my best friend. We worked together at Lilly and then worked together ever after. And Joe was the CEO of Amylin, and his research guy walks in and sees these posters. And Amylin in 1956, is that right? 96, sorry. 1996 did a license agreement with John Ing. And actually, I was telling Angela earlier, the VA had no interest in this technology. So they weren't interested in patenting it. And so John Ing did it himself. And he did this license agreement with Amylin. And they developed the first GLP-1. It was a product called, it was exenatide was the generic name. The product was called Byetta. It was treatment for type 2 diabetes. But there was also even then a weight loss component of the drug. Not nearly as dramatic as the GLP-1s today, but it was one of the components. And somewhere in the process, thanks to Joe's relationship with the then CEO, a guy by the name of John Lickletter, which I knew well also, and I kind of pushed John a little bit. The Lilly scientists didn't want any part of it. But John said, we're going to do it. And so they then were involved with Amylin when they completed the clinical trials and did the regulatory submission, and initially co-marketed Byetta with Amylin. And then it took a long time, but the problem with Byetta was you had to administer it twice a day. They worked on a long-acting Bydureon, took, I don't know, a long time to get there. But in the meantime, Lilly started their own research program in GLP-1s, and that led to their first product, Trulicity, and then now obviously tirzepatide, sold as Zepbound for weight and Mounjaro for type 2 diabetes. But it is so exciting today because people, I've read something this week, they're looking at these drugs because it impacts inflammation on the brain. They're looking at it for substance abuse. They know their heart disease abilities. Lilly's filed an application for the use of GLP-1s in sleep apnea. There are just all kinds of unknown benefits. They're looking at it as a possible treatment of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's because of its brain impact. So I think the next 10 years, and obviously the whole industry is now looking at GLP-1s. How can we position ourselves? How can we develop a drug? And I think the thing that's a little bit unique, I just learned this 2 nights ago, a little bit unique. I mean, Lilly has tirzepatide, but Mounjaro and Zepbound have 2 peptides involved. So they've got a GIP utilization as well as GLP-1. And Joe Cook, who's the Amylin CEO I referred to, told me that right before Amylin got acquired by Bristol Myers, and right before that, they were preparing an NDA application to look at exenatide with a GIP product. So it's amazing how it's all evolved, and I think we're going to see miraculous things coming out of this class of drugs in the next 10 years.
So y'all got a little bit of inside information there, all, starting from Gila monsters. So it's really interesting.
All right. You got to admire the innovative thought process
yeah.
that got you there.
Absolutely. Questions? Anyone here? Hal?
First of all, thank you very, very much. I have a question. Your career has been extraordinary. Can I ask you what your aspirations were in the beginning part of the career, the first 10 years at Lilly? I mean, that led you to a path that's been just very special.
Lucky. Well, I decided early on after, well, it was kind of interesting. I had a rough sophomore year here. I first found out, as I said earlier, I had a chance to be the starting first baseman on the baseball team, but I used to climb the hill to zoology as fast as I could to see what kind of shape I was in. So one day I get to the top of the hill and I'm really dizzy, had a hard time breathing. So I went to class and then went to the infirmary. And by the way, the head of student infirmary then was Dr. Taylor, who was James Taylor's father. So that's how James Taylor grew up in Chapel Hill. And so they were going to admit me in the infirmary, and I went into shock. I had lost so much blood from a peptic ulcer that I was admitted to the hospital. And so I missed a lot of class. And then in the fall, and that year, although you were in general college, we had, Angela may not want to hear this, we had an organic chemistry professor, and he wrote on the blackboard with one hand and erased with the other. So all you did was go to class, take notes, and he took roll. So you had to go to class. And so he gave my spring semester, it was a 2-semester course, he gave a laboratory final exam. Class average was 17. So obviously he had to be graded on a curve. And I had missed that exam because I was on a baseball trip. So I take the exam. I have no idea what I scored, but the curve was me and one other guy whose name was Bob Morris, who got a PhD here and came to work for Lilly. And he had studied for the final exam. So there's no question that, compared to Bob, my results were quite poor. So I thought after my sophomore year, I don't want to be in pharmacy school. This is not for me. And, but unfortunately, when I looked at it, since you started pharmacy classes in your first semester, I couldn't afford to start all over. So I decided, okay, I'm going to make the best of it. And we actually, our junior year, may have been the course, maybe a senior course Nancy and I took together. There was a really good organic chemistry professor who talked about pharmacology and the impact. And so, I stuck it out and I thought, okay, I'll try industry for 5 years. If it doesn't work, I'll do something else. And I was really lucky. I worked really hard, had the educational background in the end turned out to be a big benefit. And I just was fortunate anywhere all along the way. So, and my goal was, I never thought, hey, I want to be the CEO of Eli Lilly Company. That was way beyond any aspirations I had. I just thought, I want to do every job that I'm in to the best of my ability. And I'm not looking to the next job or whatever. And I think that contributed to my success. So.
I think this is where preparation meets opportunity. And Vaughn talks a lot about being lucky, but I'm not so sure it was all luck. We are going to have to transition to the next class. So if you have questions for Vaughn, we are going to have a reception just outside here. If you have some time, please stop by, say hello, fellowship together. I appreciate you all for being here. One more round of applause for Vaughn Bryson.